Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to do a reading wrap-up for the month of May. So if you're newer to my channel, you might not know that May was kind of a crazy month for us because we moved June 1st. So May was really busy with lots of packing, lots of cleaning. So as a result, I thought that I really wouldn't get a ton of reading done. But surprise, surprise, I got a lot of reading done, and that is mostly because I listened to a lot of audiobooks. So this month I participated in Mood Reading May with Becca over at Hicks Picks Books, and that was really fun. So I didn't have a physical TBR that I did at all, pretty much. I just read kind of whatever I wanted to read, which was really wonderful, especially considering I spent a lot of the month listening to audiobooks, actually more of the month than I would have normally, because I was busy doing so many things, and audiobooks just kind of made it nicer. I don't know if you can hear them in the background, but our neighbor that's like right over that way, he has sheep, so you might be able to hear them baaing in the background a little bit, which I really love. So I did do a mid-month wrap-up, and I will go ahead and link that so you can go ahead and watch that if you're curious about the books that I read the first half of the month. I will kind of mention them here with their star ratings, but I'm really not going to talk about them very much because I talked about them more in depth in other videos. So are you ready for the grand total of how many books I read this month? I read 19 books, which is crazy, and I was 3/4 of the way through the 20th and didn't quite finish it in time. So there's kind of a wide range of books that I read. I read some middle grade, I read some classics, I read some nonfiction, I read a little sci-fi, a little fantasy, like some contemporary, a couple of Christian fiction, so I was literally all over the place. I did have a 1-star, but I had 6 5-star books this month, which is like unheard of, and I think being able to mood read really helped me, so books that I already would have liked were just elevated that much further. So I had 1 1-star, 1 2-star, which is actually a book that I DNF'd, but I was a little more than halfway through when I DNF'd it, so I'm counting it in my totals. 4 3-stars, 7 4-stars, and 6 5-stars. Out of the 19 books that I read 12 audiobooks. So I didn't read a whole lot of physical books. So to just kick off with the books that I read at the beginning of the month, I will go ahead and just share their titles and their star rating before we kind of dive into the second half of the month. If you want more in-depth thoughts, just go ahead and check out my mid-month wrap-up video, and got lots of thoughts there. Okay, so the first book I read this month was All Things Wise and Wonderful by James Herriot. This was a 5-star book because I just love all James Herriot. They don't discriminate. The next book was The Wednesday Wars by Gary Schmidt. Loved this book also, listened to it entirely on audio, and it was 5 stars. The next book that I read was a sci-fi novella, Binti. I gave that book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and it is the most that I have enjoyed a sci-fi in recent years. The next book that I completed was Ella Enchanted. This was an audiobook that I listened to with my daughter when we were going to and from Kentucky to paint our new house, and we both really loved this one and gave it 5 stars. Next one is The Shape of Mercy by Susan Meisner. This was my 1-star book, and if I'm being kind of honest here, I'm still a little bit salty about it. I had really high expectations of Susan Meisner. I've heard a lot of people say that they love her, and I'm not giving up on her yet because I want to at least try As Bright as Heaven, because that's the book that everyone talks about that they love so very much. So I do want to still give her another chance, but The Shape of Mercy, a lot of the protagonists were kind of bland, and then the ending was super problematic, and even a bit triggering for me. So it was a 1-star. It would have been like a 2, maybe 2.5 star, just based on the characters and the engagement I had with the story, but that ending tanked it way down for me. I read The Case of the Counterfeit Criminals, or I listened to it. This is book 3 of the Wollstonecraft Detective Agency. I didn't love it as much as the first 2, so I gave it 3 stars. I also listened to The Tale of Hilltop Farm, which is like a murder mystery, cozy mystery kind of deal with Beatrix Potter, and that was really fun, really nostalgic for me. So I gave that one 4 stars. And then the only book that I had that I was like buddy reading this month was I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, which I buddy read with Shalise over at And Read Another Chapter. And I stinking loved this book. I gave it 4 stars, maybe 4.5 now in retrospect. The longer I sit with it, the more I like it. But because there is kind of some teenage unrequited love in it, it does get a bit angsty at times. So that was probably the thing that dragged it down just a little bit for me, but I really did enjoy it. It's a classic. All right, so now we're getting on into the books that I have not talked about yet. So the first one is Mark of the Raven by Morgan L. Busey. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. So this book was really interesting. I think it qualifies as Christian fiction, and I could start to see some allegorical foundations being laid. It is the first book in a trilogy, but there was nothing really explicitly Christian about it yet. So basically we have our main character, Lady Selene, I think her name is, and she is like the heiress to this house. There are different houses, and each house has like a different gift. So there are houses where they're able to like manipulate light or fire or water, or some have like gifts of healing or wisdom. And so there's, I think it's 7 different houses. I can't remember. So anyways, Lady Selene is heir to the Ravenwood house, and their gift is the ability to enter into other people's dreams, and from there they can manipulate people through fear, or control them in that way, or inspire them, or even kill them through dreams. And so Lady Selene has now like come of age and received her gift, and she is being trained by her mother to kind of take over this, and she is really grappling with the idea of how wrong it can be to manipulate people via fear and break their spirits or even their will to live through that. And so she doesn't necessarily want to be like her mother, but she's trying to, it's nuanced. There's other factors she has to consider besides just how she feels or just what she wants to do. And I loved her character. And then at a certain point we switch over to another character who is like the Grand Lord of, I don't remember his house name, but they control water. And I liked his character too, but I liked Lady Selene's better just because I felt like she was a more nuanced character, and I really like characters that are kind of having like this inner struggle of what decision exactly that they want to make about things, and struggling inner struggles with morality. So I thought the premise for this book was super interesting, and I really liked it. There are a few places where it lagged a bit for me, so I didn't give it 5 stars, but it was like 4.5. It was like almost there, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to continuing that trilogy at some point. Interestingly enough, I've had some people tell me that the first book was the only book in the series that they liked. And then I had a ton of people tell me that book 2 was their favorite in the whole series. So, I mean, I guess I'll read and I'll tell you what I think. The next book that I read this month was The Strangers by Margaret Peterson Haddix. There we go. So this book was fun. This was a middle grade book. I don't know if it's billed as fantasy. I feel like it's kind of more, maybe more sci-fi. So basically it is about these 3 children, Chess, Emma, and Finn. And they're siblings, and they come home from school one day and their mother is watching the news. And on the news, there's a story about these 3 children who have been kidnapped, and they have the exact same names as these kids and are the exact same age. And it's just this really strange, weird coincidence, and then their mother goes missing. And so this book was a ride, let me tell you. I really enjoyed it. I think one of my favorite things about it was the interaction between the siblings. I liked how much the siblings loved each other, and I don't know, I see a lot in media, in particular movies, I guess. I think of like Disney Channel movies or shows where everyone hates their siblings. Their siblings are just annoying and the worst human beings ever. And it's just like, they just can't stand their siblings at all. And while I know that that is obviously true for plenty of siblings, because, you know, you live with people, so the people that you live with are the people that you see the worst of, and sometimes personalities don't mesh and whatever else. That is true for some siblings. Like, there are a lot of siblings that have really great relationships. Sure, they get on each other's nerves sometimes, but they really love each other and they love being together. And that was definitely, for the most part, my experience growing up, particularly with my younger sister. We were just best buddies. Yeah, we fought sometimes, but we played together all the time. And I have very fond memories of that. So I love seeing like positive sibling relationships represented, and there was a lot of puzzle solving and codes and that kind of stuff, so that was really fun. I listened to this entirely on audio, and I feel like the narrator did a very good job. And I gave this book 4 stars, and then I listened to the second book, The Deceivers, in this month as well, and I really liked that one too and gave it 4 stars also. I can't really tell you much about the second book without giving you massive spoilers for the first book, but I really enjoyed both of them. And I found out, I think I mentioned this in a reading vlog, I found out that the author is the same author of Just Ella, which I read earlier this year and really enjoyed. So apparently I really like this author. The next book that I read this month was one that I did physically read, and that's My Life with the Liars by Kayla Carter. She also wrote Forever or a Long, Long Time, which was a 5-star book for me that I read in April. So this book follows a girl who has grown up in a cult, and the cult is, as many cults are, very abusive and just not a good or healthy situation for a child to be growing up in. And that when the book opens, her father, who was like once part of the cult and like left, has found her and is trying to basically get her out, and he like won some sort of court case or something, so he's able to take her out and have custody of her permanently now. And so she believes that, you know, she needs to get back to this cult, and so she's been very brainwashed, and it's all written in first person, so you're really kind of getting the raw feelings and emotions that she has as she's grappling with what life is like on the outside, and feeling like she needs to return, and that the people outside are very misguided, and someone's lying to her. Who is telling the truth? Is it the cult leader? Is it her father, who she's now living with, and all these things? And I just felt like it was very powerful, very well done. I really connected with the character and felt like the character really greatly displayed like the emotional abuse that happens in a cult, even to children. Just the manipulation, the brainwashing, the gaslighting, and just all these things that happen that make you second guess yourself, and who you really are and what you really want. So I really, really loved this book, and I gave it 5 stars, but my only qualm with it is I feel like it is a topic that for middle grade it feels a bit intense. Maybe if you're going with the upper end of middle grade, like a 12-year-old might be fine with it. The character in the book is like turning 13, like the week or 2 weeks or whatever that the story takes place. So I feel like that age or older would be a better age to read it, as opposed to like the 8 to 11-year-olds. They might be able to read it and not be scared by it, but I feel like the emotional topics that it tackles are really intense for younger children, and feels a bit like inappropriate for that age range. And I don't mean inappropriate like terrible or anything, it just feels like it doesn't quite click or anything like that. Some children may be more emotionally ready to handle these topics. So I don't know, that's my one qualm. For myself personally, I would give it 5 stars, but in terms of it being a middle grade book, I would probably lower the star rating, because I just felt like the topics were really, really heavy for middle grade. The next book that I read this month was Legend Born, and I was so excited to read this book. So many of you recommended this book to me, and I was really excited to read it. I vlogged while I was reading this book, and I'm going to go ahead and link that vlog down below and up in the cards, so that way you can watch that, because it kind of has more in-depth thoughts in it of my process as I'm reading it. But I actually DNF'd this book halfway through. I did read a lot of it, close to 300 pages, I think. So I am still counting it, but it was a lot. We'll just leave it at that. Like, I felt like it had 80 million things it was trying to do, and those things for me personally were kind of in opposition to each other. It didn't feel like it flowed together for me. It felt like it was just a lot. And then the fantasy element was incredibly dark and dealt with demons and stuff like that. And I didn't really love that either. I didn't know that was going to be a part of it going in, which is on me because I did not read the inside flap. I was just like, oh, this, I knew it had to do with like Arthurian themes, and I was like, cool. But they're basically demon hunters, and I didn't know that going in. And so it got extremely dark for me, a little too dark for my taste personally. So that doesn't mean that you wouldn't like it. I'm just basing that on my personal preferences. I will say I loved the writing style. It is written in first person present tense, which is my least favorite writing style. I prefer like a third person past tense. I don't love first person, but I can deal with it. But I usually really hate present tense, and I loved the writing in this book. It completely sucked me in. And so if Tracy Deonn ever writes anything that is not part of the Legendborn series, because it's the first in a series, then I will probably pick it up and give it a try, because her writing style sucked me right in, and she was dealing with a lot of really, really heavy topics. And I felt like she was doing a good job with some of them, but then, like I said, they just kind of butted heads a lot. But I really liked how she was dealing with the topic of grief in particular. It felt very raw and very heavy, and I liked that. But maybe just my crazy moving brain probably could not deal with all the different facets. It was just too complicated for me and ended up being too dark for me. The next book was an audiobook, The False Prince by Jennifer Nielsen. I've been wanting to read this book for a long time because I feel like I'm like one of the only people who hasn't read it. I started it, and at first I didn't love it. It's basically the story of this boy, Sage, who gets like taken from an orphanage along with several other boys, and we find out basically that this is not really spoilers, you find this out within the first, like, I think it's like a third chapter or something. The entire royal family in this kingdom has died, and there was a second son. Everyone thought that there was only one son and that the second son had been lost at sea, and this guy who took these orphans, he wants to train them so that way they can take over the role of prince and ascend to the throne, so that way there's not just this total overthrow when everyone realizes that the royal family has been assassinated. So in the beginning, I didn't love this book. I basically finished it within probably a 24 to 30 hour time period because I just kept listening to it while I was packing. And at first I didn't love it because our main character is Sage, and he's not like, he's very like rebellious and even seems kind of snotty, and to me he wasn't a very likable character at first. But as the story went on, I really, really enjoyed it, and the ending really bumped it up. I really thought it was really good. And this is the first in a series. I think maybe the series is 5 books. I'm not totally sure. So I would be interested in listening to more of the series or even reading it. But I did feel like the narrator did an excellent job on this book. The next book that I listened to is another middle grade book, Song for a Whale. And oh my goodness, what a beautiful cover this book has. I enjoyed the first half of this book. It kind of got really ridiculous, if I'm being honest. So here's the premise. So there's this girl, and she is deaf. She goes to a regular school, and she has one friend who's deaf that does not attend the same school as her. So she feels very, I guess, like, not heard, not understood. And she finds out about this whale who is like a mixed breed between two different species of whale. And as a result, his song is at a different like pitch or tone than other whales around him. So none of the whales can understand him. So he swims alone, trying to be with these other pods of whales, but they just I just keep rejecting him because they can't understand him. So this girl writes a song for him, and she wants, they keep trying to, like, the marine biologists keep trying to tag him, and they're unable to, like, get to him because he keeps swimming away from them. And so she's hoping that the song that she creates will make him feel like known and heard and help them to be able to tag him. And so the book, I felt like the representation of deaf people was really wonderful, and I really loved that. And I loved just the emotional rawness of feeling like you're not understood and that, like, no one hears you or understands. But there were parts of it that were just too far-fetched for me. There's this whole story towards the end. I really don't want to get into spoilery territory, but basically she makes a decision and her grandmother is on board, and it felt super unrealistic to me, especially the parents' reaction to things that take place just felt really unrealistic to me. And she felt just very selfish, you know, towards the end of the book. You know, a lot of times characters are more selfish towards the beginning, and then they kind of take a trajectory where they get less selfish, and I felt like it was the opposite for this character, that her desire to help this whale became more about her than it did the whale, and so she kind of didn't care how it affected other human beings around her. She only cared about, like, her own fulfillment in this, and I feel like it became even more about her than it did the whale. And there's something to be said about a journey of self-discovery and all those kinds of things, but again, in a children's book, it just rubbed me the wrong way, the way she acted towards her parents and the way her parents responded to her. Something that's not spoilery at all is the fact that her mother grew up with 2 deaf parents, so her mother's really excellent at sign language. Her father did not grow up that way, but despite the fact that he married into a deaf family and now has a deaf daughter, has very rudimentary levels of sign language and can't understand her half the time and doesn't even try. And, like, that really felt, I don't know, maybe that is the reality for some people, but it really rubbed me the wrong way. Like, I hated that. And so I felt like most of the characters were not really likable for me, but parts of the story really did move me. But then just the second half of the book was just so impractical that I just kind of was over it. So I went into this book with really high expectations, so maybe that is why I was so hypercritical of it. But I ended up giving it like 3 stars when I thought it would be a 5-star book. Next book that I completed was Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. How many times have you heard me talk about this month in my mid-month wrap-up and in several vlogging videos also? And I do not have enough wonderful things to say about Mere Christianity. I gave it 5 stars, but if I could give it 100, I would. If this does not end up being one of my top 10 books for the year, I will be absolutely shocked. It was amazing. I have been wanting to read some of C.S. Lewis's nonfiction for a really long time. I've read The Chronicles of Narnia, I've read his space trilogy, I've read Till We Have Faces, and I've read the Screwtape Letters, but I've never read anything that wasn't fictional. But yeah, I really loved this book. It was very deep, and he went very deep into complex topics like time and God being outside time and the Trinity. But then he also delved into very rudimentary things that we build our faith on, and things like morality and things like that. And oh man, I just loved all of it. Some of it I felt like was a little deep and kind of like went over my head just a little bit, but he uses the most amazing metaphors to explain very deep and complex topics, which I really loved and helped me, because I'd read something and I'd be like, wait, what? And then he'd use this metaphor and I'm like, gotcha. I'm tracking now. I got it. So that was just really, goodness, I just really, really loved it. I read it with Krista from Books and Jams. She hosted a Mere Christianity read-along for the entire month of May. And Mere Christianity is written, I mean, it was originally, they were radio talks that C.S. Lewis gave during World War II. And so, but when they were published, he did like amend a few things, and then he separated the book into 4 parts. And so each week we would read 1 part, and then we do a live show on Sunday and discuss it. And that was just a phenomenal way to talk about it. So I'm going to link all of those live shows below. So if you end up reading Mere Christianity, just watching that and hearing the discussion is just so amazing and just really brought all of that to life. But it just made for a really like full rounded experience, and it kept me accountable to keep reading it, not just kind of like fall off the bandwagon when maybe it got a little tougher to read in spots. But I think it's one that I will revisit again and again because C.S. Lewis's wisdom is just, oh man. And he's so humble. He's like, I'm not an expert on this, but like he kind of is. So I really appreciated his outlook on everything and feel like I got a lot out of it and learned a lot. The next book that I completed was a physical book, and it was Palace of Lies by Margaret Peterson Haddix. This is the third book in the Palace Chronicles, which begins with just Ella, and then it's Palace of Mirrors and Palace of Lies. Palace of Lies follows Desmia, who is a princess in the second book. Ella is in there, but not very much. This is the book that Ella is in, like, absolutely, like, the least. And it was my least favorite. Not because of Ella, but because of Desmia. I feel like her personality was reflected differently than it was when she was in book 2. I feel like she was just portrayed as this very weak person who had no mind of her own and was just very, like, brainwashed and terrified of everything. And I felt like that really didn't reflect like the strength and courage that she showed in Palace of Mirrors, and she just kind of got on my nerves a little bit, and plot wise it just wasn't my favorite either. So I gave this book like I think 2.5 or 3 stars, whereas like Just Ella was easily 4 stars, maybe higher, and Palace of Mirrors was also 4 stars. The next book was an audiobook that I listened to, and it was 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith. And can you tell by my voice how much I loved this book? Oh my word, it was so sweet and so fun. I had read earlier this month, I said I Capture the Castle, which is also by Dodie Smith, and that is like an adult book. This book is a children's book, which is not surprising. I mean, they made a Disney movie, multiple Disney movies actually, out of this book. And I would say that the Disney cartoon that is the most famous pretty closely follows the plot. There are some deviations, but it was just really, really, really fun. I would really highly recommend the book, but the audiobook was fun, but I think I would enjoy reading the book physically even more than I did listening to it, although the narrator had a British accent, and that is always fun to listen to. I ended up listening to it on audio because Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space actually recommended it in one of her relaxing reads videos, and it made my heart happy. You know, that was one of the last books that I listened to right before we moved, and it just really made me happy when I was kind of stressing out about all the last minute stuff. The last book that I read this month was another audiobook, and it was The 100 Cupboards by N.D. Wilson. I had started listening to this on an audiobook with my daughter in January, I think, and we got maybe like a third of the way through and just it kind of fizzled out. We were listening to it on a trip to go see my parents, and it was like a 5-hour drive, so we were listening to it on and off, and we were enjoying it okay, but then like when we got home we just kind of didn't finish it. I had bought the entire 100 Cupboards trilogy for her for Christmas last year because I'd heard great things about N.D. Wilson. He's a Christian author. So the book is about this boy named Henry, and his parents have like mysteriously disappeared. So he goes to stay with his aunt and uncle in, I think it's Henry, Kansas. I think the name of the town is the same name as him. And then his cousin's name is Henrietta. And so there was a lot of Henrys in this book. And basically the essential plot line is that he discovers like these cupboards in the wall of the room that he's staying in. They're like covered up by plaster, and he discovers them. I feel like it's really kind of late into the book when he really starts delving into that. Like it's probably more like halfway through or something, but it's not really a spoiler because it's like right on the back, and even the cover has pictures of like the cupboards and stuff. So I feel like the beginning of it was really slow moving, and that, you know, the author was trying to establish characters. I felt like the main protagonist, Henry, was kind of bland and personality-less. and I felt like his cousins were really annoying. The only character that I really, really loved was his Uncle Frank. I thought that he was hilarious and I really enjoyed his character. So basically this book kind of felt like Narnia a little bit. It feels like he took some cues from that. You know, you think of like the wardrobe and the kids going through to another world. But I think like the 100 cupboards, each cupboard is like a different location. So it's a little bit more than that. My daughter started reading it physically after we had listened to some of the audiobook. And she didn't even get halfway through before she put it down because she got kind of like creeped out by it. And she had tried reading the prequel to this book before, and she put that down because it was super creepy. And I read the part that she was creeped out by, and it was really bizarre and really creepy. And this book, she put it down when she was kind of creeped out by one part that wasn't really too bad. She was just reading it at night and she was creeped out about it. And then I kept reading it or listening to it, and it got really dark and really creepy, more than I expected for a children's book, and more than I expected for a children's book author who is claiming to be a Christian author. I could see absolutely like there was nothing about it that was really Christian at all. Maybe that gets more fleshed out because it is a trilogy and then there's a prequel too, so maybe that gets more fleshed out in future books, but I don't know whether or not I will continue with the books because they're just really dark and weird. I think I would have to be in a specific mood for it. And just like I was saying earlier with like My Life with the Liars, there are probably plenty of children who read the 100 cupboards, not creeped out by it, are sucked in by the storyline and absolutely love it. So don't necessarily like take my word for it. I did give this book 3 stars because I thought that the premise was really interesting and there are aspects of it that I liked. And I haven't decided whether or not I'm intrigued enough to continue. I might. Because like I said, my daughter has all of the books in the series, but I'm just not sure. It really, really took a turn at one point, and kind of was just, as an adult, surprised by how creepy it got. And maybe it was just like, if I had the expectation going in that it was going to be kind of creepy, then it probably wouldn't have seemed as creepy. It just kind of took me off guard. So anyways, those are the plethora of books that I read this month, and the only reason it was possible was because I was on the go constantly, packing, cleaning, you know, whatever, painting in Kentucky, driving back and forth. So there was just a lot of times where I was just listening to things, and that is the only reason why I got so many books read, because most of it was listening. I don't think I'm gonna beat this level of reading the month of June. In fact, I know I'm not, because I am recording this on June 6th, and I have hardly read anything because I can't find the books I'm supposed to be reading. I don't know what box I packed them in, but I am setting up my new shelves, so keep your eyes peeled because later this week I am going to post a video of my new book setup because I just bought some new bookshelves, so I'm really looking forward to that. So I'd love to hear from you down below in the comments. How was your reading month? Did you feel like you had a lot of 5 stars? Was it kind of a meh reading month? And tell me your favorite book that you read this month, because I would just love to hear it. My TBR list on Goodreads is forever growing, and even though it's got hundreds of books on there, I am perfectly happy to continue growing it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit like and also subscribe so we can chat more about books in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.